It is the dead of winter in the year 950, and you have just opened your eyes in almost perfect darkness. You cannot see the roof above you. You can only feel it, low and close, breathing wood smoke down onto your face. Somewhere along the wall a child coughs in its sleep. An old man snores. And beyond a wooden partition no more than an arm's length from your feet, a cow shifts its weight in the straw and lets out a long, wet breath, so that the whole endless room smells of animals and tallow and sweat and the sour, clinging bite of smoke that never entirely leaves. You are lying shoulder to shoulder with your family on a raised platform of packed earth and fur that runs the length of the wall, and if you stretch out a hand in any direction, you will touch another sleeping body. There are perhaps 20 people under this one roof tonight. Between all of them there is not a single interior wall. In your world there is simply no such thing as a room of your own, no door you can close, no corner that belongs only to you. And yet this crowded, smoke-filled, animal-warm hall is not a place of misery. It is, though you would never think to call it that, the most sophisticated piece of survival machinery your people have ever built. So stay here in the dark with me for a while, because by the time this long winter night is over, you are going to understand exactly how 20 people, a fire that must never go out, and a byre full of livestock came to be packed into one long room on purpose, and why living like this was not the failure of these people, but their quiet genius. Let me build the walls up around you first, before the fire and the crowd. The house you are lying in is called a longhouse, and it earns the name. The smallest were modest things, 5 or 10 paces from end to end, a single family and their few beasts, but the greatest of them ran on and on into the dark, 50 meters, 60, 70. The largest that has ever been found, the chieftain's hall at Borg, out on the Lofoten Islands off the northern coast of Norway, stretched an astonishing 83 meters from one door to the other, longer than many a stone church that would be raised in the centuries after. Whatever its length, the shape stayed the same. Picture the hull of a ship turned upside down and set upon the ground, the 2 long walls bowing gently outward at the middle and drawing in again toward each end. That was no accident of building. These were people who thought in boats, who measured the world by the line of a keel, and they raised their homes with the same instinct they used to raise their vessels. Now look at how those walls are made, because it tells you everything about the world outside them. There is a frame of stout timber posts, set in 2 long rows down the inside of the hall, 16 or more pairs of them marching into the dark, holding up the great weight of the roof. But the outer walls are not really wood at all. They are built thick, sometimes as thick as a man is tall, out of cut turf and stacked stone, packed and layered until they become less like a wall and more like a low green rampart with a house hollowed inside it. Over the top goes a roof of turf as well, living grass growing on your ceiling, and the whole building is often dug a little way down into the earth, so the ground itself can hug it and hold its warmth. Every part of this is an answer to one question. How do you keep the heat in and the northern winter out? Wood alone would let the cold pour straight through. Turf and stone and earth, a metre and more of it, hold the warmth of bodies and fire like a banked ember, hour after freezing hour. And so a people surrounded by forest chose, for their walls, to build with the very ground they stood on. Now the fire, down the centre of that long earthen floor, running like a spine through the middle of the hall, is the langeldr, the long fire. It is not tucked into a wall the way a later hearth would be. It lies open and low along the axis of the house, a line of flame and glowing embers that everyone lives around, and it is very nearly never allowed to go fully out, because to lose the fire on a winter night is a serious, dangerous thing. It cooks every meal, it gives almost all the light. It is the reason the house is survivable at all. But look up, and you meet the great flaw at the heart of this design. There is no chimney, there is no flue drawing the smoke cleanly up and away. There is only a hole, an opening cut in the ridge of the roof, the blurry, through which the smoke is meant to find its own slow way out. And a great deal of it never does. It rises, it cools, it hangs, and it settles back down in a blue haze that fills the upper half of the room and stings your eyes when you sit up too tall. We are not guessing at this. When modern researchers built working copies of these houses and lit the long fire and measured the air, they found levels of carbon monoxide and of fine, choking soot that sat well above the limits any doctor today would call safe to breathe. The rafters above you are black and glistening, furred with a thick preservative crust of soot laid down winter after winter. You have breathed this smoke your entire life. It is in your lungs, in your clothes, in your hair. It reddens the eyes of the old and sets the whole house coughing on the worst still nights. And it is simply the price of staying warm, paid without complaint, because the alternative is the cold, and the cold kills. Now, in the grey half-light of that smoke, let me show you where everyone actually lives, because it is stranger and closer than almost any home you know. This single long hall has no bedrooms, no separate kitchen, no private chambers. What it has instead are the benches. Down both long walls, on either side of the fire, run wide raised platforms of earth or timber, built up off the floor and spread with straw, with hides, with woven wool and precious furs. These benches are the whole of domestic life. By day they are seats, where you eat. They are workbenches, where the women sit for long hours with the wool, spinning and weaving the cloth that clothes everyone and can be traded besides. They are where you mend and cook and talk and settle the business of the household, and then by night those very same benches become the beds. The entire family and the servants and the guests and the poor relations, everyone, lies down along the walls in a single long row, wrapped in wool and skins with their feet toward the warmth of the dying fire. 20 people, sometimes more, sleeping within touching distance in one open room. There is no privacy of any kind, none, not for the married and not for the young, not for grief and not for love and not for illness. Everything that a human life contains, birth and death and quarrels and desire, happens here in the smoky half-dark, an arm's length from someone else. To you it is not strange in the least. It is simply what a home is. A home is warm bodies in a row along a wall, and the sound of everyone you love breathing in the dark. But do not mistake this crowding for a place without order, because it has a very sharp order indeed. Look toward the middle of one of the long benches, on the side that catches the best of the fire, and you will find the single most important spot in the entire house. It is the high seat, the åndväggi, the seat of honour, and it belongs to the master of the hall, and to him alone. It is often flanked by a pair of tall wooden posts, the high seat pillars, carved with figures and knotwork, and standing like sentinels on either side of the man in charge. In a house with no walls, no doors, no separate grand chamber, this is how rank is made visible. Not by a room, but by a seat, by exactly where along the wall a person is allowed to sit in relation to the fire and to the master. And those carved pillars were held so sacred that the sagas tell a remarkable thing about them. When the first Norse settlers sailed for the empty coast of Iceland, some are said to have carried the high seat pillars of their old home across the whole grey ocean. And as they came in sight of that new land, they threw the pillars overboard into the sea and swore to build their farm wherever the water carried them ashore. Think about what that means. They let the ocean itself choose the ground for their house, guided by the pillars of the seat of honour. The heart of the home was so sacred that it, and not the man, decided where a life would be lived. Now walk with me down to the far end of the hall, past the last of the sleeping benches, to the part of the house that no one today would ever expect to find under the same roof, because beyond a stout wooden partition, in the coldest end of the building, live the animals, the cattle, the sheep, the horses, and often the pigs. When the killing months close in and the pastures freeze and vanish under snow, the beasts are not left outside to die. They are brought indoors, into stalls at the end of your own house, so that in many of these buildings, fully half the length of the hall is not human dwelling at all, but byre. And this, which sounds at first like squalor, is in truth one of the cleverest things about the whole design. Those animals are warm. A byre full of cattle and sheep throws off a steady, patient heat, and that heat radiates through the partition and up the length of the hall, warming the people on the far side and stretching your precious, hard-won firewood through the long winter. The livestock are not only your wealth and your survival, your milk and meat and wool and leather. In the depths of winter they are, quite literally, a living furnace at the end of your home, breathing warmth into the walls. You pay for it, of course. You pay in the smell, thick and constant, and in the flies, and in the endless work of the muck. And not everyone shares equally in the comfort. The thralls, the enslaved men and women who do the hardest labour, are given the worst of it, bedding down on the cold bare earth near the draughty door, or in the smoky corners the family does not want. Even in one open room, the warm places and the cold places are carefully, quietly divided by who you are, and what light there is in all this is precious and dim. When the long fire sinks and the winter dark presses in for the better part of the day, you reach for the little lamps, small open bowls of carved soapstone, cradling a pool of oil pressed from the livers of fish with a twisted flax wick floating in it. That fish liver oil even gave its name to light itself in the old tongue. A couple of spoonfuls would burn for an hour or more, a single small yellow flame, and a hall might hold only a few of them, so that most of your winter life is lived in a gloom of firelight and shadow, faces half seen, the far end of the house lost in the dark, and you do not live in this warm, crowded hall alone, even setting the people and the beasts aside. In the straw of the benches and the wool of the bedding live the lice and the fleas, the uninvited guests of every crowded house in this age, which is exactly why a fine-toothed comb was among a Norse family's most used tools. And deeper still, the studies of the actual remains tell us these people carried gut parasites as their silent, lifelong companions, the unavoidable toll of many bodies and animals sharing warmth, water, and one enclosed, smoky space. So here, in the dark, is the twist that turns this whole picture over. Everything that sounds to a modern ear like wretchedness, the smoke, the crowd, the animals pressed in at the end of the room, is not the mark of a poor and backward people at all. It is the mark of a brilliant one. That choking smoke you have been breathing? It rose into the rafters and cured the fish and the meat hung up there to keep, turning your low ceiling into a vast smokehouse that fed the family through the hungry months, and its soot preserved the very timbers of your roof from rot, so that the poison in the air was also, at the same time, the thing keeping your house standing and your larder full. That crushing press of 20 bodies with no privacy. It was warmth, banked and shared, 20 small fires of human heat under one turf blanket, and those animals at the end of the hall were not filth you were too primitive to keep outside. They were the furnace, deliberately housed where their heat would do the most good. Look at the whole longhouse again with that in mind, in a single cutaway from end to end, and it stops being a hovel and becomes what it truly is, a single, warm, breathing organism, engineered down to the last turf and timber to hold a family, its beasts, its fire, and its food alive, through a darkness that would have killed them apart. Nothing here is wasted. Not the heat of a cow, not the smoke of a fire, not the warmth of a sleeping child pressed against your back. And that is the thing that lingers, long after the smell and the smoke and the noise. In that whole long room, from the master in his carved high seat, to the thrall on the cold floor by the door, from the newest baby to the oldest grandmother, to the cattle stamping in the straw, not one living soul was ever, for a single moment, alone. You slept in a row of the people you loved and the animals that kept you alive, all of you breathing the same smoky air, warmed by the same low fire and by one another's bodies, listening in the dark to the same wind, trying and failing to get in through a metre of turf and stone. There were no walls because there was no wanting of walls. To be alone on a Scandinavian winter night in the year 950 was to be cold, and to be cold for long enough was to be dead. So they built themselves this one warm room, and they filled it, wall to wall, with every living thing they had, and they called that home. So here is what we would love to hear from you. Which part of this life under one roof struck you the most? The 20 people sleeping in a single row with no walls between them, the cattle brought indoors as a living furnace at the end of the hall, or the smoke that slowly poisoned the air and yet kept the food and the very house alive? Tell us in the comments below, because the real people of the past are almost never who the legends say they were. They were not filthy savages huddling in a hut. They were engineers of survival, who took a family, a fire, and a herd of animals, packed them into one long ship of turf and timber, and out of smoke and crowding and the breath of beasts built something warm enough and clever enough to carry them all through the longest night on earth.